In his book Trust, Hernan Diaz talks about a period prior to the 1929 crash, and he talks about how basically everything went berserk. Without going into details, I recommend reading the book, but the purpose of this conversation today is going to be about the myth or the truth about speculative financial markets. What does it actually mean? Lots of people have written about speculation manias and bubbles and all that kind of stuff. And in this section, I'm going to discuss the book more formally when I'm done with the book. But I just want to mention this period when he talks. It's about in the middle of the book about one of these financiers who says that the 1920s were very prosperous and a very important part of American economic history, and the 1929 crash was driven by two forces. One is the reckless speculation of people thanks to low interest rates. He talks about America's indoor sport became finance, and the croupiers, i.e. Wall Street, were scrupulously taking advantage of that. And then he talks about the bureaucrats in the Fed that are somehow trying to curb all of that, but then always make mistakes. They're always at the wrong time, the wrong place, that kind of thing. And this all resonates very well with today. Today we are in a very similar situation. We are just past the period of incredibly low interest rates, and now we're having the Fed trying to sort of curb everything and running, as they say, behind the eight ball, not behind the eight ball, but behind the curve. So that is the conversation today about what is this all about. The purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. And these are important topics that you want to have an opinion about. I just, in the same context, actually the same book, there is a passage that says that life is mostly filled with small pleasures and pretty much irrelevant details that make up your life, though, your everyday life, so don't take that too lightly. But then every now and then there's this situation when you really have to act, when it's about to be or not to be. And Diaz says in the book that you don't necessarily have to succeed in all those types of situations, but you better be the main actor when they occur. That's, I think, incredible life advice, because very often we sit down and we think, what is life all about? And I think I absolutely agree. Life is like a SWAT team, like a Navy SEALs team. You train and train and train, but you have very few actual opportunities to act. But you better be the main actor when those opportunities occur. So this is really important. This is not even on podcast. It's August 27, 2022. This is Crimdelco. It's a Sunday. There's no update for the year. We're down 29.4%. The market's down 15%. We're underperforming by 14.4%. So let's talk about the subject matter. The subject matter is financial markets as a whole. What's the purpose of financial markets? The purpose of financial markets is to finance business. Actually, traditionally, the purpose of financial markets has been to finance government. That's how it all started back, at least in modern finance. If you go back to the Medici, and then if you go even further back to the Fuggers, and then you go forward, let's say, to the times of the Bank of England, and then further forward, the wars and all that stuff, the big wars, the First, Second World War. Government is one of the main players in the global financial markets. So the purpose of finance is to finance governments and businesses. I think the business part actually is sort of a modern ancillary to the government finance that really is the purpose of financial markets. And it's unfortunate, and it's obviously a bad thing, but that's the way it is. And we don't want to, sugarcoat reality. We want to be as close to reality as we can when it comes to these things. So let's not sugarcoat it. The main purpose of financial markets is to serve the government. That's also why the government, of course, will regulate financial markets in a way that it always serves itself. When I say government, I mean bureaucrats, to some extent elected officials. But one of the big problems of today's democracies is that bureaucrats have taken over. You know, people like Gary Gensler, for example, who is the SEC chairman in the United States, he has his own agenda. He doesn't care about elected officials and all that stuff. He has his own agenda, in particular when it comes to crypto in this particular case. But that's for a different podcast. What I'm trying to say here is that we are at the mercy of bureaucrats, at the mercy of the Federal Reserve. They're all bureaucrats, and then the bureaucrats in all the regulatory bodies, and then we have bureaucrats, of course, in other bodies. I mean, what's going on, let's say, with the health department and the Fauci and all of that stuff with the pandemic, unfortunately, is also tangentially related to financial markets. So we can't just say, well, doesn't concern us. Well, it does. Actually concerns us a lot when it comes to when they lock down the economy and all that stuff. So I think we need to have a healthy view of financial markets from the perspective of, first and foremost, what is their purpose? So the purpose is to finance government and business. I think they have morphed into also becoming vehicles for business. So the actual business school teaching that financial markets are there to finance a productive economy is not wrong. It is actually true, because some of the functions in the financial markets are such that a company like Tesla or SpaceX can go public and disrupt transport, energy, and space and improve everybody's life. So this is actually possible. But again, there is a lot of other stuff that is sort of layered on top and below and beneath and on the side of all this, the government finance, all the speculative stuff. And I want to talk a little bit about the speculation now, because this is what Hernan Diaz is alluding to in this particular part of the book, Trust, where he talks about the 1920s. And one of the important things he says there, from the perspective of a character in the book, it's that the 1920s were not a failure. The 1920s were building a base for a dominant American economy of the 20th century, and that's certainly true. To some extent, it's also enabled by unforced errors by Europe and Japan, who were probably leading economies before the 1920s, but then they ceased to be leading economies for their own unforced error, as I said. So, but then why did we have a 1929 crash? Well, we had a 1929 crash, and Hernan Diaz says because speculation took over and the Fed. The Fed is an important part of this whole game, because the Fed is a bureaucratic solution to a problem that is bank failures. Again, I'm simplifying, but this is the way I understand the foundation of the Fed in 1913 is preceded by decades of negotiation between Wall Street bankers, politicians, and business people. And it's particularly the Wall Street bankers that want to have an insurance. They want to have an insurance against failure. Now, you might say, well, what is that all about? Well, bank failures are tricky in the sense that they happen. It's hard to foresee them. It's hard to prevent them and all of that stuff. And to be fair, it is a little bit scary sometimes. You're a banker and you can come down because all the other bankers come down, even though you might have been doing prudent business. So then knowing that, you might have an incentive not to do prudent business in the first place and take advantage of, when the party's singing and dancing, you might as well dance. And then when things collapse, everybody's going to collapse anyway. So that's sort of the situations bankers are in. Now you could say, well, you don't have to be one of those suckers that follows the crowd. Why don't you just wait till everybody collapses and then you play the game? Well, you might run out of capital because nobody's going to fund you in the good years when you're prudent, and when the proverbial shit hits the fan, you don't have capital, you're not liquid. Now, because of all of that, the Fed has a certain purpose, and it's the purpose of an insurance against bank failures. So this is a legitimate purpose. This is not just bureaucrats trying to take power into their own hands. What is the purpose again? It is, we have an insurance in a sense that, imagine you're on a block with, let's say, 50 houses, and you want to make sure the real estate value keeps a certain level. So you say that we create a fund that buys from distressed sellers, so that way the house never goes below, and we have a certain insurance against failure. The immediate repercussion of that, of course, is what economists call moral hazard. As soon as we introduce something like that, prudent policies go by the wayside. Why? Because you don't have to be prudent anymore. Now, you might not have to be prudent in the first place, because, like I said, it doesn't really matter. You might as well dance when the music's playing, and then when everything collapses, you collapse with everybody else. Keynes said that it is much better to be down when everybody else is down than to be unique, or something like that. That applies to financial markets as much as to anything else. You can say that with the Fed, this is even worse, because now you know that if the shit hits the fan, you're going to be bailed out. This is what moral hazard is. This is what the financial markets are all about. And what Hernan Diaz is alluding to, and I think in his book Trust, which is a book just published, I don't know, maybe this year or last year, he's obviously talking about the most recent situation in financial markets, which is very similar to the 1920s. Low interest rates, sort of personal finance becoming a big deal. Even back then, I don't know how they did it, but they did it. Doesn't matter. Maybe things like the Bank of America revolution, where banking became more accessible to normal people, where workers became consumers. That's important. So we have this, increase in purchasing power. At the same time, we have lower interest rates, and the conclusion of all of that is that we end up in a situation where everybody speculates. There is the casino, and there are the croupiers, which are the Wall Street banks, which make money, and then, of course, the Fed, which is trying to manage all of this. And the problem with the Fed is, even if they have good intentions, they're always behind the curve, just because they're not able to. They're kind of like the car company that is trying to prevent the car thieves from stealing the car. Well, the car thieves will always be a little bit ahead, or Microsoft and all these other companies might always be a little bit behind the hackers. The criminals, the bad actors always have a leg up. But that's a conjecture. Nobody can prove these things, but this is how it feels. So within all of that context, now, of course, the question for us hedge fund managers, and the purpose of this podcast, is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about what is it like to run a hedge fund, and how do we behave in this particular environment. And to us at Orange Capital Partners, there's a couple of things that we can do to navigate this environment. One is we manage leverage like a hawk. Like, we cannot not be obsessed with our leverage. We have to make sure our leverage is always at a level that is negotiable, that is stomachable. That's number one. Number two, we have a principal stack. The principal stack has a couple of functions. First, it's a guidance to the question, what should we even do? There's so many ways to employ capital. Well, where are we going to try to employ the capital? Okay, we, by the way, this is just a tangent. We consider ourselves as investors, but that word has been misused a lot. The day trader in his dorm in a university, the housewife, between her yoga classes, us hedge fund managers and Wall Street people, they're all doing the same thing, investing. But in fact, they're not all doing the same thing. They're very different things. And we consider ourselves as employees of wealth creators. And instead of giving them our labor, we just give them our capital, which is just a sort of summed up labor. Capital is just another form of labor. It's saved labor, if you want. So anyway, but that's semantics, economics. What's important is we're employees, so we have to find somebody that is willing to take our capital, and that's sometimes a real problem. Particularly, let's say, SpaceX is a good situation, where at least a while ago we would have liked to invest. Maybe not now anymore. It's becoming too hyped up, but certainly a while ago it would have been a nice thing to work for them as a capital provider, but we somehow weren't able to accomplish that. So often investing is the way we see it is us employing capital or finding employment for our capital with wealth creators. This is what we're trying to achieve. So back to, like I said, there's many people who call themselves investors, but it's not all the same. And the distinctions are often very deep. Again, I mean, a day trader, by definition, has different time horizon. That's already changing her game, right? She's trying to wage the market during the day, find patterns, all that stuff, and some of them might be successful, good for them. It's not what we do. Wall Street is more interested in transactions because Wall Street is often compensated by commissions. Again, a very different type of thing, has nothing to do with investing. A lot of people actually that are officially calling themselves investors, such as fund managers and all that stuff, they're not investors because what they're really trying to do is collect fees. And there's a saying on Wall Street, and I think it's a good one, where you could just basically ask yourself the following question: how do you get paid? And once you understand how somebody gets paid, you will understand their culture and you will understand what they actually are. So if you get paid by something like fees, okay, if somebody charges 2% management fee on their fund, well, that's how they get paid. That means their incentive is to going to be to gather capital, to raise as much capital as possible. Their incentive is not to have high return. We at Orange Capital partners are paid with a straightforward performance fee. So we get paid if we make money. For you, we have a watermark. So our incentive is to make money over time, make a lot of money, and that's what we did. We have a annual return of north of 15% for the last 15 years. That's, it's probably in the top 1% of our vintage, I would say. I can't prove that again. Please don't take my words as some sort of marketing because A, I can't prove it. B, I'm not even sure if it's true. And C, this is not marketing. The purpose of this podcast is not to market ourselves, so please use other avenues to inform yourselves about what we do. The purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So I was talking about our principal stack. Why is the principal stack so important? Because the principal stack gives us a way to answer the question of what is it we're going to do next. It answers the question, why is it we're doing what we're doing? And it also gives us guidance on how to do it. So it's about the what, the why, and the how. And those are the three big questions you have in pretty much any job. What is it you do, why you're doing it, and how you're doing it. So for us, it's generate wealth by investing in fundamental new concepts and engineering practices with large impact. That's the why. The how, it's in the principal stack. And the what, well, we generate wealth. This is what we do. This is really what we do in the end. We generate wealth by employing our capital. So on the how, the principal stack is a little bit more than just a few words. So I can tell you things like we want to invest in unique entrepreneurs and all that stuff. And you can read about that on our website. You can listen to our episodes, go back, do a search on things like principal stack. You'll find a lot, particularly in the early days when we also introduced the fund and the podcast. The fundamental concept of our principal stack really is on entrepreneurs, and what we mean with entrepreneurs is entrepreneurs that tackle new engineering concepts, fundamentally new concepts that just spill over out of science into the realm of entrepreneurial execution. I said yesterday, and I'll say it again, like often you might accuse us of just following buzzwords when we invest. Are you doing AI? Are you doing CRISPR? Yes, but the difference between me and, let's say, media people or any other people that talk about this stuff, I actually have to make it work. I'm not paid for having ideas. I'm not paid for having visions. I'm paid for actually making it work. And this is the difference. And it's my job to employ my capital with people that can execute, for example, against changing transportation, making it electric, delivering AI, delivering digitized life science, or whatever the buzzword is, whatever the theme is that I'm investing in, I have to make it work. Otherwise, my gene pool will be extinct. Maybe not biologically, but definitely from a business perspective. And the principal stack is supposed to help me with that. This is the idea. Again, I don't want to go too much into the principal stack here, but the conversation is now about, okay, are we in a situation where we're at risk of a bubble, or what is a bubble anyway? I think a bubble is something that, to be fair, doesn't really concern us, because the way we manage our fund, it is supposed to be bubble resistant. I said once, a couple episodes ago, that we have certain assumptions. So we do operate within the bell curve. We're not black swan people. But we are extending pretty far out to the tail. So we're not covering all the tails. What that means is that we can't, for example, run our fund and assume that we can have World War III or a nuclear war. That is not something we can have within our operating assumptions, because it will become very, very difficult to run the fund profitably. We would have to pay so much money for insurance that it would be very difficult to profitably run the fund. But we can go pretty far. So we can have financial crisis, pandemics, all kinds of things happen and still run the fund profitably. That's not the problem. But the problem is, again, we don't cover everything. Okay, we don't cover, like I said, nuclear wars. We don't cover a revolution in the U.S., an overthrow of democracy, or those sort of things. Now, I would say we're flirting with those tails sometimes. Let's say our debt as a country is so high that we might be flirting with those tails right now. Because if the debt overwhelms the economy, then our operating assumptions of the economy don't work anymore. But I'm just saying that because I feel that sometimes we have to take into account the fact that everything could go wrong. So as a hedge fund manager, you want to manage the fund in a way that you can deal with most predictable disturbances. It's like when I surf or ski, I put myself in danger. I just surfed this morning at Half Moon Bay, 6-foot waves, that's fine. 12-foot waves, it could at least injure me. So I need to be aware of that. But most of those waves, most of the situations, after a couple of years of surfing, you have enough experience to understand what could happen to you. So you're fine with that. But there's always this black swan event, the freak wave, or something bad happen, or some other surfer bumping into you. These things could happen, and then you could have an injury, but you cannot not surf just because those things could happen. That's the way kind of we see the hedge fund business also. So to summarize, I guess my conclusion to Hernan Diaz's critique is critique. I don't know if he's criticizing, but he's certainly alluding to a situation in the financial markets where everything is about gambling, and where the responsibility sort of has lost, where accountability has gone, and all of those things. And I would say that, yes, that is a risk. Yes, that is certainly something you need to take into account, but it's manageable. It's manageable. You take the bell curve of all possible events, you cut some of the tails off, otherwise you can't function. But within those, within a pretty big part of the bell curve, you can function if your principal stack is the right one. And I think it's your job as a hedge fund manager to evolve that principal stack. It took me years to evolve it, and everybody should have their own principal stack. Don't copy my principal stack, because it is something that came out of me. That's how I am comfortable creating wealth. And everybody should have their own principal stack. And fundamentally, the wealth generation business is about applying the right principal stack to your circumstances and then navigate the world. And you're sometimes also, of course, you can be lucky by having somebody inventing something or some scientific breakthrough that happened in your time. But like I say, we all get our shot. We all get our shot at scientific breakthroughs. That's not the problem. The problem is to apply the capital and develop your own principal stack in a way so it fits your circumstances and it fits your purpose. What kind of wealth generation are you actually looking for? In our case, we are in this period right now where we have the ability to generate wealth because there are technological developments that allow us to do that. Our principal stack is geared towards those developments. It's congruent with those developments, and that's why we're confident that our mission can be accomplished. Thank you.